Welcome back. Once again, my rapid rating has climbed just a little bit above my daily rating, as shown on the screen here. I had lost a couple of rapid games, but then I won one to bump me to this point, and then I lost a couple of daily games. I'm just going to take you through what I think are the highlights of that rapid game, the most recent one that I won, and hopefully one or the other of us can learn something. All right. This one began with the Caro-Kann defense, which I have been playing, as I've mentioned several times. Now, my opponent played the knight to f3 version, and none of this is outstanding. This is all normal. Now here, once my opponent plays this, we have transposed into the exchange variation. But because of the move order and having that knight there, black has a slight advantage already. So even though I haven't reached this position through that exact move order before, we've come full circle. This is a normal move for black at this point. And when white played that, that's not normally what white plays against me here. And at this point, I reached a completely unique position, unique to me. And this bishop really doesn't point at anything, and there's no reason to get it out just now. It's not like they're going to block it in with their e-pawn. But, like I'm about to do with mine, in my previous experience in very similar positions, the only reason that white moves this out is it's kind of a trappy line, and I recognized it this time. I didn't recognize it last time. The whole idea is for them to move their knight here to b5, hoping to get a fork protected by the bishop. So they would be forking my king and rook here. But this time I recognized it, and I remembered what the best move was going to be. I don't have to worry about it until they move the knight down. So right now I can go ahead and play e6, which is my plan to further develop these pieces so I can castle. But now I know if they play here, which they did, that my best move is to move the rook over. It's, in fact, my only good move at this point in the game. And as I said, I only know this because it's happened a few times before. If you try something like putting the bishop here to challenge their bishop, of course they can take it. If you push the pawn up, hoping to scare the knight away, well, it comes in and it's accomplished its purpose. So at this point, you have to know this. And I fell for it a few times, but not this time. And so now white's best move is just to move that knight back. But they didn't. They got their other bishop out, and even though, as I said, this is a completely unique position to me, generally once this bishop is trapped outside the pawn chain, if they ever offer this trade, just go ahead and trade it. It's almost always going to be the best move, and in this case it was. So, and I'm not sure exactly why it's white's best move to take back with the pawn, according to Stockfish. I really don't understand why Stockfish wants them to double their pawns. But almost everybody that I've played, I think everybody that I've played that I've traded the light squared bishops here, they've taken back with their queen, which is probably what I would do. That way I feel like I'm not damaging the pawn structure. But anyway, now I decide to chase that knight away, and of course it goes back. And then I thought, I can go after this pawn. Now, of course, right now the queen is guarding it, but to get there I have to put my knight here on b4, and that hits the queen, so the queen has to move. And if my opponent makes a knee-jerk reaction and moves the queen to the wrong place, then I have a triple fork once I get my knight there. Of course, when I do that, I expect them to move the queen someplace that will guard that pawn, and they did. But now, I feel like this knight is kind of stuck blocking my rook from this pawn. And if the knight ever moves, then I can just pick up that pawn. So I get my knight out, completing my development. The idea here is to either go out to g6 to challenge the bishop, or possibly to go in here to help hit their remaining center pawn. My opponent castled here. I decided to get that out to put pressure on their center pawn, which hopefully I can get to later, either from there if I get a chance to take that pawn, or from back here. But then my opponent moved that knight. And it's like, well, that's the whole reason I put this here was to go for that pawn. I'm surprised. Let me show the engine here. Stockfish says it's not my best move to take that pawn, but the only way that White maintains their advantage here is by moving this rook over, which is a natural move at this point, but then they have to make one more move after that that's not natural in order to maintain this advantage. So they did that, and I thought, well, I'm just going to bring this knight back here and maybe end up back where it came from here in a little bit. And if I do and they trade rooks, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to have control of the open file. And I'm not going to worry about my knight being right here because the bishop protects it. And in fact, I would probably move my bishop out here in just a minute. So that's what I did. Now, here's where I was talking about. The only way that white maintains their advantage, as you see, is to play queen to b3. And that's not a very natural move, certainly not at our level. Now, one thing that might be natural about it is that their a pawn is currently under attack, and that is actually the only really good move that defends it. I think here I might be tempted to bring this knight back to defend the a pawn if I were playing with white pieces. I know that's another way to defend it there, but then you've surrendered the complete control of the open file, the only completely open file on the board. And like I said, I expected my opponent to take here, and they did. So I don't know that many people at my level are going to see this. It looks like it has a double purpose of protecting the pawn and threatening the knight. But as we've mentioned, the knight is defended, so the only reason you would move there is to guard that pawn. And a lot of people aren't going to see that. They're going to guard the pawn by trading, which is what they did. And then we get this position. Well, so right here is when I developed my plan. And that was the last time, by the way, that white had an advantage according to Stockfish. But there I realized my opponent is very interested in trading pieces. And when I run into an opponent like that, I try to find advantageous trades, trades that either improve my position or mess up their pawn structure. Now, their pawn structure is already a little gone because I'm up this one pawn. And they traded off that pawn earlier for my c pawn. So they have two gaps in their pawn structure. So they've isolated these three over here from these two over here and this extra one in the middle, whereas I don't have that problem. I have 5 pawns over here that are all connected, and on this side, have 2 that are connected. So I thought, developed my strategy here. They're willing to trade piece for piece and give me a pawn every now and then. And so I didn't know that I was winning, but I knew that at least I had a plan, which is a good thing. So they put their knight in here, and that immediately told me, wait, they're still willing to trade piece for piece, and I'm going to pick up another pawn this way. So that's what happened. And now I'm up 2 pawns. And now not only do they have the gap, their whole center is completely pawn free with all these files, which could end up coming in handy as big open files for those, but I'm up 2 pawns. And again, all these are connected. And that pawn is still under threat. When they pushed that in there, I thought about taking this free pawn and then coming back, but I thought maybe in the midst of that, they're going to have time to threaten my queen or something like that. So I went with my plan of offering them another trade. So I put that in there, and lo and behold, they took it. So now Stockfish, I think, actually wanted me to take with my queen there, but again, I have now 6 connected pawns and 1 open file. Of course, I need to castle as soon as I can. They brought this queen over here, attacking my only undefended piece at this point. Still went with my plan, offering them a trade. Well, they traded, and now I have 7 connected pawns, and there's nothing really that they can do to stop me from castling. I suppose they could try something like this, but then obviously I would just take it. So they brought their rook out to attack now what is now my only undefended piece. And I have 2 ways of defending that. One would be to drop the knight back, or 3 ways, I guess. Stockfish actually suggests bringing my king out now. Honestly, I didn't consider that. Or putting the knight up here. Well, I don't like to go backwards if I can help it. Now, sometimes going backwards is the best move, but here I thought going forward would be the best move to defend that pawn. And then, of course, from there, my knight is aiming at some important squares right in front of their king's safe position. So that would turn out to be my second best move. And here is my opponent's only blunder of the game. They didn't see that from here my knight not only guards the pawn but also aims at these squares, and so they challenged my knight with their bishop, leaving me that. And I'm proud of myself that I saw it, but right there is the moment that I knew that I was winning. Before, I knew that I was maybe gaining a slight advantage by picking off those pawns with each one of those even trades and having a pretty good pawn structure. But here's where I knew that I was winning. And to my opponent's credit, they did not just resign here now that they're down that exchange plus some pawns. And they continued to play. They also had a slight time advantage, as you can see on the screen. I had finally gotten my rook out with that castling. That was actually pretty decent from my perspective, because I obviously, by moving my rook over here, I had been planning to advance this pawn, but they blocked it. And they keep my king from coming out. But that's okay, because I can move another pawn and get my king out a different way. So that's what I did, and I hoped to use this massive pawn advantage to force a passed pawn here at some point. And there, I don't know that was my best move. Is that what Stockfish wanted me to do? Oh, it is. Okay, well, I don't feel so bad then. I had thought possibly about pushing this pawn forward, which would lock their bishop in place. But then, of course, their bishop could come down here and start threatening these pawns, which is what it did here in a second. It came down here, but of course I can move these pawns. And I've chopped off another one of theirs. And I just wanted to wait and see what Stockfish suggested here. Okay, my move wasn't that bad. Oh, it's still deciding whether my move was one of the better ones. G5 would have been okay. And D4. Okay, well, D4 would have, I guess, helped to complete the pawn chain. But I decided I could check, and then depending on where their king moved, I might be able to start taking those pawns. And then I went after their bishop, which forced it to move back. And here it does want me to play D4 to lock in the bishop. And that's what I played. Okay, well, I don't feel so bad then. I knew that I was going to have some trouble because this bishop and this pawn are locking down those two pawns over there and keeping them from advancing. Also, of course, this bishop can swing back and forth on this diagonal. And between the king and these three pawns, they're going to be able to chip away at my structure. So at some point here, I got a little worried that their king was going to be able to get over there and take that pawn. But I had the advantage of having more pawns, so their king had to get distracted and to go after another one. Oh, wow, it says I actually have mate in 11 here if I would check. Oh, wow. I didn't see that. If I had checked with E4, they wouldn't take it, obviously, because then that would let this pawn go. I didn't see that. Okay. It also says, oh, I could have gone here to prevent them from getting any closer to this pawn. Okay. Well, this is instructive for me that I could have played this a little better. That definitely I should have seen, because then it would be protected by the pawn. They're both on light squares, so their bishop can't get to it, and my rook would be cutting these squares off so the king couldn't get any closer. And then, of course, I think it would want me to play E4 at some point after that to push the king back, and then I could push my d-pawn. Okay, well, that's not what happened, but I never lost the advantage here, even though I didn't always play my best moves. Oh, by the way, when they put this bishop over here, aiming at this pawn, I was willing to give up my rook for it. If they took that pawn, I was going to take the bishop, and then when they took back, I was going to go here to free this pawn, get that pawn off the board, and then I knew that the opponent couldn't stop these. So I'd already decided that if need be, I was going to give up my rook for the bishop, maybe even rook and a pawn for the bishop, just because I had such a huge pawn majority. They had to come back to protect that pawn. It says now again I have mate in 10, but I need to play f4. Mate in 9. Well, I didn't see that. I actually made this probably, it wasn't counted as a mistake, but I think it was. I didn't see that the bishop was also guarding this pawn. And so I promoted here, thinking that when the king captured it, I would pick up this pawn. Well, when that happened, then I realized that their bishop was guarding that pawn and I couldn't do it. So I had just given up that pawn for nothing. But I still have the huge advantage of all the extra pawns, which are now split into 3 different islands, but that's okay. There's not much that they can do about it. And we fiddled around here again. I was looking for to trade off these pieces, knowing that once they captured back with the pawn, I would take it, and my opponent couldn't stop these 2 pawns. But they didn't want to do that, and they went after my other pawn. Then I started to get worried. Of course, I don't know because I can't see Stockfish and don't know that I'm that far ahead. They had to bring the bishop back to protect that pawn. Okay, I made one of my 3 best moves here. They took. I took again in hoping for this, because now that there's nothing stopping this pawn. Or if I advance here and they take, then there's nothing stopping that pawn. But they didn't take. They took that pawn over there to give themselves a passed pawn. And again, played one of my better moves. They had to run slightly with the bishop. E3. Oh yeah, I should have played that now. Okay, but I didn't. I started pushing that pawn. And that's okay, because it's gotten close. Now they have to blockade it with their bishop, so I went after it with my king. And here, I made a snap decision to... Not there. We almost repeated moves. If they had gone back, I was going to have to do something different, because I was pretty sure I was ahead and I didn't want to draw here, but fortunately they didn't repeat. Then I got next to their bishop and pushed my pawn forward. When they took that, they gave me their bishop thinking that they would get to promote their pawn, but they didn't realize I was ready to sacrifice my rook for it. So I was, and then there was nothing that they could do to stop me from promoting my other pawn. But again, to my opponent's credit, they must have looked at the clock and saw that they had more than twice as much time left as I did, and so they kept playing. My computer is slowing down here. Let's unshow that, and we'll just run through these moves. There was nothing that they could do, and of course I do know how to checkmate with a queen and a king, and I did not run out of time. So anyway, that's the game. Hopefully we learned something, and thank you for watching. As always, we'll see you next time.